Good afternoon. I'm Joel Franklin, and welcome to JLG's Award Prediction Webinar. It's November, and Publishers Weekly has already posted their Best of 2015 list. The National Science Teachers Association just released their Outstanding Science Trade Books. The National Book Award nominees are down to the short list. At School Library Journal, the blog Someday My Prince Will Come and Heavy Metal, a Mock Newbery, are in full discussion. Yesterday, School Library Journal launched a week-long social media blitz of top 10 titles. In today's webinar, our special guest, Kiera Parrott, will chat with Deborah Ford about their top 10 favorite contenders for the ALA Youth Media Awards. But before we go further, I have a few housekeeping items. Please turn off pop-up blockers in your browser, as these may cause problems when viewing the webinar. If you're experiencing technical problems, please use the Help button on your audience console, and the webinar tech team will get to you as soon as possible. If your screen becomes locked, try using F5 to refresh the webinar console. If you're on a Mac, use Command R. Need credit? A certificate for continuing education credit is available in the certification folder. It will also be available in the archived presentation. If you want to follow along, a handout of all of today's titles is in the resources list folder. If you have any questions or comments, you can send those in at any time via the red Q&A box. And please join the conversation on Twitter. You can tweet us at JR Library Guild and use the hashtag JLGWebinars. Today, Kiera Parrott, book review editor at School Library Journal, joins our resident expert, Deborah Ford, in a discussion of their favorite contenders for the January ALA Youth Media Awards. Let's find out what they think.
Thanks, Joel. With more than a dozen awards and honor books, selecting 10 titles was not easy. In fact, my first choice for illustrations, I know for a fact won't win, the Caldecott. But I want to talk about it anyway. And why couldn't it win? Sidewalk Flowers is so beautiful and so smart. It's even unusual in that it's a wordless book, and it has an author and an illustrator, which how can that be? Because the author, John Arno Lawson, took a walk with his daughter one day, and when he came back, he realized, what just happened might be a great book. And so he sketched what his ideas might be, and then he got an illustrator, Sydney Smith, who illustrated the wordless book. But guess what? They're both Canadian, and so they are not eligible for an ALA award. So the book will get on lots and lots of notable lists, but it can't win the Caldecott Award. But I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't win the Canadian Library Association illustration next year when that comes out in April. And so in April, Canada will announce the 2015 awards for Canadian authors and illustrators. So you might check them out too. My second choice for illustrated picture books is Jessica Bagley's Boats for Papa. It's her first picture book, and I had heard lots of people talking about Boats for Papa and how beautiful it was, and what a great story about Buckley, who makes these beautiful boats for his papa, and he writes a little note for Papa, and he sends them out to sea, and he and his mom celebrate life and live together. But we keep thinking, where's Papa? Where's Papa? And then towards the end of the book, now somebody had told me, sob, 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 tissue book big time. Did you hear that, Kiera?
Yeah, I think I'm getting a little teary as you're talking about it.
Well, just last week I was talking about this book, and I was just going to lead up to a place, and I was just going to stop when some teacher said, hey, we have to know because we've had lots of parent deaths in our school this year, in their elementary school, bless their heart, 5 parent deaths. And they said, this sounds like a book that might be a helpful thing for our communities. And so then I tried to finish the story where, spoiler alert, it turns out that Mama has all along been collecting these boats at night and saving them for Buckley. And so when Buckley discovers these boats that his mama kept, he writes a different note and puts it on the last boat that goes out to sea. It's a boat for Mom. See, can't do it. This is one of those books that when you share with your children, it's like Where the Red Fern Grows. You just have to read that book 1,000 times out loud before you can read it to your children. So you might just have to hand this book to your kids. But it's just so beautiful, and it has illustrations that are charming, and they go perfectly along with the story, and you just want to pore over them at the details and the little boats that he made and all the different kinds of boats, and you watch the boats get better as he makes more and more boats. It's a beautiful story, even if you have to cry every time you talk about it.
I totally agree. Waiting. So this is a book by Kevin Henkes that, it's almost a book that you could almost dismiss because it's so quiet and still. The protagonists are these little inanimate objects. But when I read this picture book, and it reminded me in spirit, in theme of the works of people like Crockett Johnson and Ruth Cross. It just has this beautiful classic feeling. You have these little toys waiting on the windowsill, watching and wondering, and they're so childlike in their emotional range. They have this vulnerability, but they also have joy and friendship and camaraderie with each other. Kevin Henkes in this book uses a lot of white space with these bright bursts of color, particularly when he's illustrating the interiors, the little toys themselves and the windowsill, and those are washes of watercolor, and then outside the window he uses colored pencil. So there is this sort of interesting change in the artwork too, what's happening outside. I've told some of the other editors at SLJ, this is my Caldecott pick, that if it does not get some Caldecott love this year, I'm going to eat my hat. I will be shocked and a little bit sad. I might shed a tear. This is just one of those books that it's brilliant in its simplicity, and what I loved about it is it really respects and understands that emotional development of very young children. It's about patience, obviously, and about, and how hard it can be, but also wondrous it can be to wait and be patient. But it's also just about friendship and newness and change, and just lovely. And there's this one spread towards the middle. There's a wordless sequence that's spare text throughout, but there's one wordless sequence with them just staring out this window at the different seasons and the different magical sort of sights to them. What happens outside in the greater world. And I think that young children especially can appreciate that emotion of waiting and wondering and wanting to know what's beyond. So that's my big pick for Caldecott this year, I think. Next up, so this is Drum Dream Girl, which some people have been calling this a picture book biography. We tend to think of it more as a fictionalized biography because it is more of an inspirational look at a famous Chinese African-Cuban musician named Milo Castro Zaldariga. I think I might have pronounced that wrong. Apologies. And it's just beautiful. It actually doesn't name her by name in the book itself, in the text. The text is very sparse. You've got Margarita Engel, who does the words, this beautiful lyrical free verse, paired with the artwork of Rafael Lopez, this lush artwork that just extends across the page. There's no space left untouched by this textured, colorful artwork that he does, and it's about inspired by the true story of this little girl's musical pursuit. She wanted to be a drummer, and this was at a time period when that particular type of music and being a drummer was considered something that only boys and men could and should do. So there's also that angle of this young girl persevering against gender sort of stereotypes of the time, and really embracing her heritage and the different strands of her heritage, because she was Chinese and African and Cuban, and taking all these disparate elements and combining it into her style of music. I think this is totally a Caldecott contender. It might get some love there, and obviously definitely a Pour Belpré committee contender. I can't imagine that the committee is not talking about this title this year.
And what about nonfiction? Do you think it falls into the cyber category too?
Oh man,
because
a lot of people are talking about it as a biography. I personally don't think it has enough nonfiction elements because it is so lyrical and sort of fictionalized. I feel like the cyber committee may not hit those criteria quite hard enough, but you never know.
Right. Well, and they have lots of options in addition to that,
right,
too.
and there's a lot of good nonfiction this year, I know. So Letty and Lucy was another one of my picks. I know you guys can't see me, but right now my hand is actually like clutching my chest because this is the kind of book that when I read it, it kind of like jabs me in the heart every single time, even after reading it several dozen times. So here you've got the Steads, the husband and wife team, Philip and Erin Stead at their best, honestly. They're combining their signature way that they just have this beautiful way of illuminating the smallest details and bringing really to the forefront these tiny moments, these very small, sometimes silent kindnesses that really make all the difference in relationships. And they did that in Amos McGee, and they're doing it here now. This is a story about a little boy moving to a new house. It's about finding a new friend. It's about getting over fear of the unknown and what's scary and dark. There's one spread in particular that I think deserves a Caldecott all on its own. And here's the deal. So you've got the protagonist, this little boy Peter, who, the whole half of the first book, he's really afraid of the dark woods that lay beyond his new house and what's out there, right? And he creates this golem sort of creature, Lenny, out of pillows to protect him and watch over it. And the very next night, it looks like the way that Philip Erin Stead set up the composition is it's again Peter inside his house looking out the window at the dark woods, but this time, even though the framing is the same and he's looking out at the same ominous dark wood, it's not fear that he feels. He's looking now at Lenny, his golem, and what he feels is concern and empathy for the fact that Lenny might be lonely. And that to me was so powerful that the transference of fear to empowerment. He creates this creature to help him get over his fear, and then that turns into empathy and kindness for his new friend. And I just thought that, talking about the combination of text and art working together and saying so much without saying much at all in terms of the text, just brilliant, just brilliant.
Well, let's talk about one more picture book, Dawn Tate. This one is another one that falls into lots of categories: nonfiction, picture book, Caldecott, Coretta Scott King, Seibert. Gorgeous book. From the end pages, don't you love the end pages of this book? Just nice, that nice soft yellow and the soft brown and the words kind of flowing of George Moses Horton's poetry. And it's just telling the biographical story, the remarkable story of George Moses Horton, who taught himself to read, which is an amazing thing in itself. He was a slave. As a young boy, he was separated from his family. Music was important to him. Poetry was important to him. He began to write poetry. And later on, he started selling poems to young couples in love, and for $0.25 a poem, which I think is interesting too. But then people, started paying attention to him, and they wanted to pay for his poems. And then, little by little, he became the slave of the wife of a professor, and he got some education, he went to school, and it just goes on and on and on. But in the illustrations, they're just gorgeous little vignettes inside the house, out in a field. The character of Horton himself is just almost at times larger than life, which I think shows how much he overcame the things that for some people just they can't overcome it. And so, like the look on his face on the cover, and the way the sun burst out, you can almost just see the joy that writing brings to him. And Don, in fact, is on the road right now, really not home at all. I know the feeling. Talking about his poem, his new book, and working with kids and going to libraries and churches and talking about this great man and this beautiful book. And then because it's for just a little bit older group, there's a lot of back matter in this, which, as a librarian, I love that because it's got resources both online and in print. There's an author's note. So it makes it kind of like a picture book plus, which I love that too.
Yeah, I agree. I think this could get several medals. I think you're right.
Yep. And the interesting thing about all this discussion that we're having is that, of course, every year, I sit at the Youth Media Awards and I make tick marks about, what's a JLG selection, what's an SLJ star, and stuff like that. And people look at me like, show off. But it's true. I mean, we are very good at choosing some of the best books, but we get all those books and we look at them. But the truth of the matter is that nobody can really pin it down. We don't know what's going to go on behind the closed doors. And you can look at the books that are all starred. Right now there are 7 books that have 6 stars. And last year I looked, and some books that were highly starred got nothing. And books I never heard of didn't get any stars. Boom, they get everything. And you look at each other like, what? I don't know that book. It is. I love the surprise of the whole thing. And whether your favorite book wins or not, you just cheer them on till the end. Speaking of favorite books, when we bump up into the age groups and into the Newbery category, that age group, one of my favorites, this is me, right? Yep, me, Echo.
That's right.
Because Kiera gave me her 10, and then I took 10, but a lot of her 10 were my 10. So we kind of agree on that. But Echo, I loved everything about this book. I mean, first of all, this is the first book Pam's published in about 5 years. And she has certainly done her homework on this. I mean, who even knew there was a harmonica factory? I didn't even think about it. But the harmonica, a sort of magical harmonica, is the theme that ties all the different parts of this book. But it's, I think, brilliantly orchestrated, if I can use a musical term. It starts off with a mystical kind of fairy tale about this harmonica that brings joy to this character, and then boom, the next thing we know, we're in 1933, and in early Nazi Germany, where you are starting to have to hide who you are, and the joy a boy finds making music and with a harmonica. And then from there, it goes to 1935 in Philadelphia, and this same harmonica gets into the hands of 2 orphan boys, one of which joins a harmonica band. Who knew that either? There was an orphan harmonica band. So there's a lot of truth blended in Pam's story. And then the third part goes to 1942 during World War II, when a young migrant girl gets her hands on the harmonica, and she comes face to face with internment camps and the reality of those, which of course in today's conversation is quite relevant. And then all 3 of those stories come back together with the fairy tale at the end. I mean, it's just,
incredible. Yeah.
She had to be not like I was in college, where I wrote the story and then I wrote the outline. It's too well plotted. She knew where she was going with this story. Great characters, tear-jerker. I cried and cried. But I think I must cry at everything this year. But a beautiful book. Mm-hmm.
So this might be an odd pick. Very rarely do sequels, certainly not a third book in a series, do they get a lot of award love. But we're talking about Rita Williams Garcia here, who breaks all the rules. This is the conclusion to the series that started with One Crazy Summer, which did get a heck of a lot of love when it came out. And the Gaither sisters in this one travel down to rural Alabama for the summer to spend it with some of their extended relatives and getting to know some really interesting family history. Like the first 2, there's a lot of humor in this book. There's really fine characterization. Obviously, we love these sisters, but we also get to know some of their extended family down there. And there's just such strong heart in these books. And I feel like with each one, Williams Garcia just gets stronger. And I, for one, get more attached to these characters. When the book ended, I cried. I cried again, and I think that's our theme today.
Yep.
I was not ready to say goodbye to Delphine and Vanetta and Fern, and I had the opportunity to see Rita Williams Garcia last year. I think it was at the Alsk Institute where she spoke, and I came up to her. This was actually before the book came out, and we knew it was coming out, and I said, how could you end the series? How could you say goodbye? And she said, well, I've got to move on. I've got other books to write. I've got other characters inside of me, and she felt good about it. And I will say it doesn't feel abrupt. It feels satisfying when it ends. I think that the writing here, of course, is stellar and so atmospheric. You really get to know this Alabama landscape and these amazing characters. I think that it's definitely a shoo-in for some Coretta Scott King love, but I also would not be surprised at all to see it garner some Newbery attention as well. And the thing about jellyfish, so there have been a lot of middle grade books about death and grief lately. I've read a lot of them, but I'll tell you, some of the books about grief really are forgettable, and some of them are not. And this is one of the latter. Susie is this girl who's a rationalist. She's scientific minded, and she's just not willing to accept the fact that her former best friend is gone, that her former best friend drowned over vacation. And it's her search for answers in this book. Why do people have to die? And her struggle to accept the brutal fact, that, as her mom at one point says to her, sometimes bad things just happen. And Susie is not going to accept that. And that's really what this book is about. It's at the heart of it. It's going to resonate not just with anyone who's ever felt pain or loss, but, anyone who sort of questions the whys of the world. And I think that we know that in the long history of Newbery winners and honors, sad books tend to do pretty well, just saying. But the quality of the writing here is really heartfelt and poignant, and it's intermixed with facts, sort of these nonfiction interludes about jellyfish. There's a lot of information in this book. She does a lot of research because she's going to prove that it was this I think it's the Irukandju jellyfish, the most deadliest sting on the planet. That must have been the case. It must have been that sting that killed her friend, and she's going to find the scientist who's going to help her prove her theory. And this is the way she processes her grief, and it's a brilliant way to look at grief and for her to work through her really complicated and really tough feelings and some guilt that she has about how this relationship ended, and the fact that she didn't get to say goodbye and she didn't get to say the things that she felt she needed to say to her best friend. It's another tearjerker. It's a 10 tissue box, one.
It is. And it's a first novel and a National Book Award finalist. So, yeah, it'll get some love. And Lost in the Sun, Lisa Graff. I think I was going to see her at some event that got postponed because of another author's illness, and I was ready to say, okay, where's the tissue box symbol for the front of this book? Because it should have come with that. It's a story about a little boy named Trent who is playing hockey when he shoots a puck and it hits this other kid in the chest. Turns out that kid had a heart defect that nobody knew about, and he dies right there. So imagine being 12, 13 years old and feeling like it's your fault that you killed somebody. I mean, how do you live with that? And so what Trent does, instead of sinking into his grief, he just is so angry and so angry at himself and at the world, and he just shuts himself off from everything, all his friends, his sports, his everything. And then he meets a girl named Fallon Little who pretty much forces him out of this funk that he's in. And she's got her own burdens. She's got a deformity on her face. We don't ever know really where it came from and what it is, but she saves him. And so it's a believable saving. So I love it for that too. And then one more. Gosh, our time is getting away from us. This is exactly what Kiera and I were talking about earlier. With ALA being so early this year, and with the way our awards season kind of runs, books that come out towards the end of the year, sometimes we don't miss them. Sometimes we do miss them. But I just now read this Gary Schmidt book, Orbit in Jupiter. And so this bumps up into the higher part up to age 14 of the Newbery. It's about a 13-year-old boy who becomes a father at the age of 13. And he has some really bad experiences, and he ends up in, not jail. What do they call that, Kiera?
Juvenile
Reform
detention?
School. Juvenile
Reform
detention,
school.
yes,
That's
thank
right,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But he also has an abusive father. Well, he ends up in the foster care system and winds up on a Maine farm with a boy named Jack, who's a little bit younger than him. And it's a story of how that family just takes him in and loves him and helps him. But it does a turn at the end that you are probably not going to be ready for. And it just stole my heart, the whole book. I mean, it's Gary Schmidt. I love him. Okay for Now. It's, that's that same kind of book, where it gets in your heart and you just wish that everybody could read this so they could save the world. And so they would have empathy for kids that go through hard things and know what to do. But I just loved it. I loved it. And shifting gears now to nonfiction. Kiera?
Nonfiction. All right, I'll try to speed it up a little. I know we're getting down on time. So I love when the Cyber Award goes to nonfiction that has a really strong narrative voice, and that's not something that you always find in nonfiction. And this story is the history of Motown, and the narrator is this kind of funky character called The Groove. It's a guide, a tempo that keeps readers on track as they wind their way through the Motor City, and they learn about Berry Gordy Jr., this black kid from Detroit who created a music label that totally changed the American musical landscape forever. The only bad thing I can say about this book is that while you're reading it, as an adult, you're going to know these iconic songs. So I think as a teacher, librarian, if you have a chance to share this, open up YouTube so that you can, YouTube some of these songs and these clips so you can have them playing.
Yeah.
It is fabulous. You will be grooving along with it.
Yep, I agree. And then another book, where at first glance it looks like a picture book. It's really a picture book for older readers, which I've been a huge fan of for a long time. It's poetry. It's biography. It's about Fannie Lou Hamer and the differences that she made in the civil rights movement. Gorgeously illustrated, tells the story, some of which, of course, will hurt your heart, but it's information that we need to know, that our kids need to know. I think it has not only cyber potential, but it has Coretta Scott King potential. Just gorgeous. Oh, and Holmes, the illustrator, first book. It's her first illustrated book.
Absolutely incredible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Most Dangerous. So how can we not include a Steve Schenken book? Come on, Steve Schenken here is at his Schenkeniest? I don't know if that's a word. We've got a gripping, edge-of-your-seat, real-life story of spies, lies, and huge government conspiracy. I mean, if that doesn't connect with teenagers, I don't know what will. This is the story of the Pentagon Papers through the tale of Daniel Ellsberg, the analyst whose decision to release those papers to the press about the Vietnam War and the secrets that the government had been keeping completely shattered America's trust in the government. It's still a very controversial thing. Not only is Schenken's research impeccable here and his storytelling is just top-notch, but this is a very, perfect story for, older, upper middle grade readers and teens who I think are really going to embrace the rebelliousness and the sort of, and also idealistic spirit of Ellsberg, and that feeling of seeing something wrong, and what do? Do you say something? Do you do something? And how much courage that takes and how scary that can be and what the repercussions are. I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I've heard Steve talk about this book as a thriller, and absolutely. I watched a 65-year-old man read this in one day. I just laid it out, and he picked it up, and the next thing I knew he was on page 50. And then when he finished, he said, does he have any more books? Yes, he does. You'd like them. Yes. I'm forfeiting my younger nonfiction for cyber. You've heard me, our listeners who've done this lately have heard me talk about How to Swallow a Pig, probably, I love that book, and The Great Monkey Rescue and Untamed. But I have to talk about two nonfiction books for young adults. And one, of course, you've heard me talk 100 times about, The Symphony for the City of the Dead, M.T. Anderson, which I love so much. Just brilliantly researched and told. And then Drowned City. I mean, how can we not talk about Drowned City? Written and illustrated graphic novel about Hurricane Katrina. I talked about that last month. Very poignantly but honestly told story using lots of primary documents also in the text of it. And then for our YA.
Yeah, All American Boys. So we've got Jason Reynolds and Brendan Keeley, these two YA authors writing two different narratives, one from the perspective of a young black boy, one from the perspective of a young white boy. And the black teen is involved in an altercation with some police brutality, and the white teen, who's not quite his friend, he's like a friend of a friend, witnesses it. And it's really about what happens afterward, after this event, that forces both of these characters to really come to terms with some really challenging and uncomfortable truths and assumptions and institutional racism. And it's eye-opening. It's essential. I won't be surprised if this gets some recognition from the Prince Committee, CSK. It is timely, and I feel like it's required reading for most teens.
Amen.
And Challenger Deep, which won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature last night. I was in tears watching Neil Shusterman come up to the podium and accept this award with his son, Brendan. This is a story based on his son, Brendan's experience, or inspired by it, and not quite based on it. This is a very interesting sort of dual narrative, because there's the realistic thread. This boy, Caden, 14-year-old teen, who's struggling with mental illness, specifically like a schizoaffective disorder, a form of schizophrenia, and being paranoid, thinking people are trying to kill him, thinking the wallpaper's coming, to life, hallucinations, all these crazy things happening, being institutionalized. And then there's this fantastical thread where that same teen is aboard a ship, a pirate ship, bound for the Challenger Deep, which is the deepest place on Earth, located in the Pacific Ocean. And you're going to read it and not really know what's happening and feel confused for half the book. But that's the point. You're in the mind of this teen struggling with mental illness. It's a life-changing book. You're going to come away with it with a deep understanding and empathy for mental illness. And I know that was part of Neil's acceptance speech last night, talking about shining a light on mental illness and removing some of that stigma. And I think this is just an incredible work of art. And the sentence-level writing is just so powerful.
I picked two very different additional books in the YA age group. One is Red Queen. Came out early in the year, which again, sometimes I worry they don't get enough love. First novel for kids, especially that like the Hunger Games, because it's that kind of genre, about a girl named Mare who is a red. Her blood is red, but because she's a servant. And then the other part of her kingdom is Silver. Silver is, am I doing that right? No, she's red and silver. But what happens is some of these kids, the Silvers all have powers. Well, it turns out that Mare also has powers, and her power is accidentally discovered. And so to cover the whole thing up, she becomes engaged to the prince on the silver side, and they have to hide her red bloodness. And, of course, it doesn't work like that, because there's a Scarlet Guard who's trying to attack the Silvers, and there's a battle, and it's the first of a series, and you will love it. And then Written in the Stars, another first novel written by Aisha Saeed, and she's part of the We Need Diversity movement group. But it tells a really important story, I think, about arranged marriages and how it's part of their culture, not their religion. I just read an interview where she was talking about the things she learned as a result of writing this book. But it's about an 18-year-old girl who is from a Pakistani family. She's never even been to Pakistan. And she's allowed to be American except for the boy thing. And she, of course, gets a boyfriend and gets caught. And so they decide to take her to Pakistan so she learns about her family and her history. And the next thing you know, she's married and her family has left her in Pakistan. It hurt my heart. But according to the author, it happens all the time. And so she wants people to know that story. So I think that it's important. So I wanted to talk about it. And then last but not least, Kiera, you got the last one.
Yes. Okay, so some of you are probably looking at this saying, what? This is my dark horse selection. It is a sequel to 2014's The Riverman. It's a long shot for Newbery probably, but hear me out. Here are the reasons why I think it could happen. Maybe some honor love. Although it's good to have read the first book, I do think that this book, The Whisper, can stand alone even if you haven't read The Riverman. It'll stand alone just fine. And here's the thing. One of Newbery's criteria is originality of concept. And let me tell you, this is one of the most original and unique books I have read in years. It's set in the 1980s, and the protagonist, Alistair, discovers a fantastical hidden universe called Aquavania. And certain kids can travel to this world and create their own little mini world. Anything that they wish, anything that they imagine, that they can think of, becomes real and a part of their own unique world that they can travel into and out of anytime they want. But an evil entity known as the Riverman, or the Whisper, is stealing into these worlds, sucking them dry and killing the kids, who, when they disappear in Aquavania, this magical world, they also disappear from the real world. And so this is scary. I'm not sure that this is middle grade. I really think it's more YA. It's advanced and sophisticated. But beyond this fantastical, kind of creepy, scary premise, there's also some really deep philosophical stuff going on and complex themes about existence, about imagination, and on some levels about what it means to be a creator. And then when you create something, the responsibility that you take upon yourself for the well-being of those creations. It is heavy. It is trippy. It is really perfect for sophisticated readers looking for something, off the beaten path. There is going to be a third book that's coming out in April. It is so weird, but in the best kind of way. So it's my dark horse.
Cool. So those are some of our favorite contenders, and if we had more time, we might talk about these.
What James said, very quickly, picture book, awesome, adorable, misunderstanding. Steve Jobs, which is a graphic novel, nonfiction, brilliant. Unusual Chickens is a very young middle grade book. There's funny chickens. It's hilarious. It reminded me of Roald Dahl. This is Bird and Diz. It is a concertina-style picture book about the two jazz greats, and you got to listen to Salt Peanuts while you read that book. Twin Dime. This is a downer, ends on a hopeful note. It's about a young girl who is involved. She's trapped in sexual trafficking, and she's fighting to get out of it and save herself and another young girl who's trapped in this horrible situation with a pimp. It's definitely for older teens, but it's incredible.
And if I had more time, I would talk about Emmanuel's Dream by Laura Thompson, about a boy who has only one good leg, and he writes to San Diego, and they give him a bicycle, and he ends up riding it across Africa and starting a movement. Roller Girl, a surprise, amazing book about roller derby, and graphic novel for middle grades. The War That Saved My Life, about the kids who were relocated during the war and how many kids survived because of that. The Water is Water, beautiful, about the water cycle. And The Seven Most Important Thing, which of course made me cry, about a real artist and the junk that he collected. So there you have so many of our titles, but so little of our time.
We only went 9 minutes over. That's not too bad.
That's not too bad, really. So thanks for joining us today, Kiera.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a blast. I really appreciate it.
Cool, thanks. And everybody remember to check our website after the webcast. There's a post-presentation post, and you'll find a list of all the books that we talked about with links to their book detail pages or to SLJ.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Deb and Kiera. That was awesome. We want to thank you, our participants, as well, for joining us today. And be sure to mark your calendars for January 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern for the next in our JLG webinar series. Our topic will be elementary titles for our upcoming spring 2016 selections. Don't miss that. In the meantime, join the SLJ chat on Twitter tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for the announcement of the top 10 Latino books, top 10 graphic novels, and top 10 apps. On Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern, SLJ will be hosting a Google Plus YouTube live stream of their best books list. Be the first to know about their favorites. And if you want to know more about JLG and its services, or to sign up for an SLJ subscription, contact your account rep or send an email to sales@juniorlibraryguild.com. Tomorrow, you'll receive an automatic email regarding today's webinar. If you follow the link, you can watch the archive webinar and print your certificate of attendance after 10 minutes of viewing. And until next time, happy reading.
Happy reading, everybody.
Bye.